This is episode 14 with David Fogel. Welcome to the Sports Business Classroom audio experience. I'm your host, Sergio Millis, and each week I'll bring you an inspiring person or message to help you discover how to break in and succeed in sports and life. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and let the experience begin. This episode is brought to you by Sports Business Classroom, an immersive sports business training and educational experience dedicated to preparing future sports business professionals. It is a one-of-a-kind learning opportunity for those interested in the business of basketball and jobs in sports. Sports Business Classroom combines the best of all worlds into a single package: great academics, hands-on experience, immersion in the Las Vegas Summer League, and interaction with some of the best minds working in and around the NBA. For more information about Sports Business Classroom, go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com. This episode is also brought to you by Hall Pass Media, a full-service marketing agency that specializes in brand consulting, event management, digital marketing, and creative design. For more information on Hall Pass Media, go to hallpassnetwork.com. In today's episode, we sat down with David Fogel, Executive Director of the National Basketball Coaches Association, the labor association that represents all NBA head and assistant coaches. In his role, his mission is to ensure that NBA coaches have a voice regarding on-court as well as off-court matters. David manages all areas of day-to-day legal and business operations for the NBCA. In this episode, we discuss how his interest in labor relations was sparked through his family's necktie business, the importance of building genuine relationships and learning from mentors, and the value in always being transparent, open, and direct with the NBCA members and colleagues around the league. In addition to his role as Executive Director of the NBCA, David also currently serves as a member of the Board of Trustees for the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode. I learned so much talking to David and walked away with so many things to think about, and I'm sure you will too. Without further ado, I give you Mr. David Fogel. Dave, thanks for being on the show. It's great to have you.
No problem, Sergio. Really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
So I thought we'd start, like any good story, at the beginning. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about where you grew up, what life was like as a kid, and all that good stuff.
Sure. So grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, a town about 45, 50 miles outside of New York City. Always loved playing sports growing up, but really grew up in a tight-knit community. Have a younger brother and an older sister and two great parents. And as far back as I can remember, just loved being outdoors, playing sports. Grew up playing baseball and basketball and you name it. So life in Connecticut was great and just fortunate to have just a really great foundation of family to fall back on.
So you said you played sports as a kid. Did you always know that you wanted to be in sports professionally, or is that something that kind of came to later on in your life?
You know, I'd say growing up, probably like most kids, I had the dream of being a professional basketball, professional baseball player. Mm-hmm. I quickly realized that right around high school, when I was about a foot and a half too short to pursue any of those dreams, that probably wasn't going to work out. But always knew that if I could find some way to fall back on the things I love, sports and honestly, a lot of leadership positions that I had growing up, whether that was, being presidents of clubs or captains of sports teams, or I even remember having teachers, kind of pulling me aside after class and asking, what might be interesting to, the other kids, or, how can I help get the kids to be quiet after recess? And so just kind of, being in those leadership positions, I knew if there was some way, to marry some of the stuff I grew up with, that would be fantastic.
So let's talk about this leadership thing. Where do you think you got that from?
I think leadership really came just from experience. And, as far back as I can remember, Like I said, always grew up playing sports. And so I think the team aspect, and I went to a very small private Jewish day school, and not a lot of great athletes. And so I think being one of the better athletes in my class, was always looked to be the captain or whatnot. And so I think just from a very young age, having the respect of my friends, but also, just being able to, also have the respect of teachers and elders. I think that allowed me to grow as a leader.
Absolutely. And so you went to high school in Connecticut, and then you decided to go to Emory for political science and sociology, if I'm not mistaken.
And first, even before that, so my father was and still is a psychologist, and so initially looked to go to Emory to pursue a major in psychology. Quickly learned after the intro course, where didn't do too well, that this wasn't going to be the career for me.
Gotcha. So you shifted majors to political science and sociology. What made you decide on that versus, business or whatever, other majors are out there?
Mm-hmm. So even to take a step back, so what took me to Emory was sports, which is phenomenal, and I highly recommend it to anyone out there who's listening is just to participate in sports if you can. Sports gave me a tremendous pathway growing up, and went to Emory to play baseball, and so it was really fortunate to have some help from the athletic department and the coaching staff to get me to Emory, which I ended up having 4 tremendous years there. But always knew from a very young age that wanted to work with people. Kind of knew, probably since middle school, that if I could, wanted to be an attorney and help solve problems. Was always a great listener, and went to undergrad at Emory, and not necessarily focusing on a pre-law track, but after my bout with the intro to psychology course, looked at our course guide, and found that there were a lot of law courses in political science and sociology. And so took some electives, and ended up deciding to double major, roughly the end of my sophomore year, but always with a focus that I knew I wanted to go to law school.
And I know that you're obviously super passionate about the law. What led you to law school other than just those courses? Like what led your interest in just being an attorney and being able to help people?
Mm-hmm. I think it all started from my childhood and growing up, which is a really interesting story. So my grandfather, Sam, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, he and my grandma, who's still alive, they were both Holocaust survivors. And when my grandfather came over to this country, the only job he could get was sweeping floors in a tie factory. And, slow and steady, he was able to kind of work his way up, gain the trust of the owner, and they allowed him to open and close the factory each day. After hours, he taught himself how to put together the machines, essentially act as an extra service repairman, then taught himself how to cut the patterns on the machines, because at the time in the cutters union, you were afforded a little bit better pay and better benefits, and worked his way up for many years. And when the owner of the factory came time to retire, he approached my grandfather and asked him if he wanted to buy the business.
Wow.
And at the time, my grandfather did not have any money to his name. A lot of the banks weren't necessarily, loaning a ton of money. And so he went to a ton of family and friends, scraped up, the money to do it, and went to a good friend who also happened to work at one of the banks, and on a handshake deal, literally with no collateral, nothing to back it up, was able to, get a small loan to purchase the business, and ended up having a tie factory. He called it Fogel Neckwear, Fogel, my last name, and neckwear for ties. And they had that business for about 40, 50 years. And so some of my, fondest memories are kind of going to the factory for holiday and Christmas parties and just being there, with my grandfather and seeing how the workers, just loved him and treated him much like a brother or a father. And, kind of seeing my own father and my uncles who all worked in the factory, just, really enjoyed the people aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And even to go a little further. So an interesting story. For 40 years, my grandfather and the company Fogel Neckwear made all the ties exclusively for Polo Ralph Lauren.
Wow.
And, that in of itself is a really interesting story, how Ralph got to know, my grandfather and everything.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. So when Ralph was first starting off, he actually went by a different name, and he was a buyer at one of the department stores. And Ralph had this idea to create wide boxy ties. At the time, everyone was wearing skinny ties, which you see a lot of people wearing today. And he had this idea to make them a little bit bigger. And no one gave him the time of day. A lot of people thought the idea was too far-fetched. And so Ralph wanted to go out on his own and cut some designs. And so he went to the factories and mills in Italy and England and asked if they could recommend an honest shop here in the United States for him to get some designs cut. And separately and unbeknownst to each factory, they both recommended Fogel Neckwear in New York City, my grandfather's factory. And so when Ralph, got the material for the ties and went back to New York, knocked on my grandfather's door and told him his story and that he wanted to have some ties made. And my grandfather said, absolutely. He, refused to take any money from Ralph, told him that, when he was growing up, a lot of people had helped him get his first start and the story about buying into the factory. And he said he'd love to pay it forward, so he wouldn't take any money. But he told Ralph, if you ever make it, don't forget about us. And so from that moment, Polo exclusively made neckties with my grandfather at Fogel Neckwear, which was just a tremendous story. And I got to see firsthand, especially as I got older into my, middle school and high school years, what that meant to work for the factory and really what that meant from a labor union standpoint. So my family was on the management side, but just hearing their stories about their collective bargaining and negotiations and in particular, how for a number of years, especially when the garment industry was going overseas, how Polo and my family, really all the management, decided to stay in business for probably 9 years longer than other neckwear companies were here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And that was to make sure all of the workers could either retire, could max out on their benefits, or, my grandfather, Sam, found everyone who wanted to continue work another job, either locally or pretty close by. And so it was really important for my grandfather and father that, they would not close up the shop until all of the workers were good to go.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
So that's what drove your initial interest in law. That's the origin story. Tell us a little bit about your first job, where you ended up, and how you ended up with the Coaches Association.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I had a really big interest in labor law growing up and always wanted to work with people. And probably like a lot of listeners out there, went to law school with an idea that, if I could break into sports, that would be ideal, but always wanted to keep an eye and a focus on labor relations. And so quickly in my first year of law school, I joined an organization. It's known as the Sports Lawyers Association.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the really interesting pieces about the Sports Lawyers Association is you're able to download a directory of all the participants. And so reached out to countless number of attorneys or other executives in the field really just looking to learn how they got to their position, what advice they might have for a young law student looking to break in, and had a lot of really interesting and unique conversations. Heard a lot of great advice, heard some, honestly, not so great advice.
Mm-hmm.
But it all kind of furthered my desire that I knew I wanted to break in, and ended up applying to, almost every internship or job that I can find, and actually spent my first year of law school just getting rejected. Heard many no's. Wanted to intern, first and second semester of law school that summer, and it just didn't work out. And so ended up getting a job with a solo practitioner who did a lot of real estate law. And at the time, was pretty bummed and down about it. But looking back, it was one of the blessings, because I tell students now, and anyone who's looking to break in, it's really important to know what you want to do with your career. But at the same time, it's almost just as valuable to know what you don't want to do or what you dislike.
Absolutely.
And that's not to say that I had a bad experience, but it just really taught me, to get a better grip as to all the different legal aspects that I could be working on, and what I liked and didn't.
Right. No, absolutely. And just to that point, I think, knowing what you're passionate about and spending the time to figure that out is so key in sports and in life, because the truth of the matter is you're just not going to excel at anything you're not passionate about. Right. And, there are so few jobs in sports, right? It's a really small knit community. And if you're just not passionate about what you're doing, you're just not going to have the energy and the will to do what it takes to succeed. It's just as simple as that.
Absolutely. You said it great. I mean, anyone that I've met now being on this side, if you can tell their passion almost instantly, and especially in the line of work and working for the coaches, all are extremely passionate about what they do, and you just always need to have that fire when you're in front of these types of people.
Absolutely. So how'd you end up with the Coaches Association?
Sure. So after my first year of law school, and after that internship with the solo practitioner, kind of went back to the drawing board and realized that a lot of what I had been doing, which was sending emails and making phone calls, while they provided me with a lot of information and advice, it wasn't moving the needle, so to speak, and quickly heard from some other mentors and family friends that I had to get out there, step out of my comfort zone a little bit, start attending some events, and being in New York City for law school was really just phenomenal because of all the sports leagues that are here, the different agencies, the different companies, and so started going to events at night after my classes, and ended up at a sports law symposium here in New York City, where there was about an hour and a half panel, and if I remember correctly, there were either 4 or 5 attorneys speaking, attorneys from the NBA, the New York Jets, I think some attorneys from Major League Baseball, and there was this one gentleman who was wearing a bright bow tie, a 3-piece suit, a really dapper hat, and his name was Michael Goldberg, the executive director of the National Basketball Coaches Association, and was just really brilliant, but also funny, and was very down to earth. Didn't take the panel or everything too seriously. Kind of knew when to lighten the moment, and as soon as the panel ended, almost everyone in the audience kind of rushed to some of the attorneys from the different sports leagues, and a few of us went and chatted with Michael, and had just a really phenomenal conversation with Michael. Told him, some of my backstory in labor relations, and my grandfather's story, and he told me to give him a call about a week or two later, and so did, and ended up securing a spot to intern with him and the Coaches Association, and did that for about 20 hours a week, starting with my second year of law school. Really didn't look back since then. Kind of worked every semester for Michael, and even in the summer where I took another job, was still working on projects for Michael on the side.
That's phenomenal, and I definitely want to just underscore for the listeners that you stepped out of your comfort zone to go to this sports law symposium and decided to take a shot at speaking to one of the panelists. And that's really what's, in part led you to where you are today, right? So that one interaction has really changed the course of your life, right? And I don't want our listeners to take that lightly, because one of the things we try to encourage is that, small things matter, right? Small things become big things. And so you really just need to do absolutely everything you can to get yourself into the mix, to make sure that you put yourself in the right position to meet the right people, because you just never know.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add, there's no substitute for face-to-face interactions, and now being on the other side and having spoken at a lot of sports law symposiums or different events, it's not necessarily coming prepared with really detailed questions or topics that you think the panelists might want to talk about. It's kind of just being in the moment and listening to one or two items that they might have spoken about, and just having that interaction afterwards is really important and goes a long way.
Yeah, above and beyond that, do you have any advice? Because not everybody's outgoing, right? Some people are a little shy and don't necessarily want to take that leap. Any advice on how to approach quote unquote celebrities or important people after a panel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, be respectful, but, definitely try and hone in on something he or she has said, something that you found interesting. And it's just a quick conversation, could be 10 seconds, could be 20 seconds, that you found this to be interesting, and here's why. And the hope is to get some contact information and try and extend that conversation at a later time.
Right. Absolutely. So you started interning at the Coaches Association. You were there how long before you got an actual job, a paying job with them?
I interned for 2 straight years, working about 20, 30 hours a week for the Coaches Association while I was finishing up my law degree and getting a graduate certificate at night one semester in sports business from NYU. So 2 straight years interning for Michael and the Coaches Association.
Heavy load there. So why don't we before we jump into the Coaches Association, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about, the Coaches Association and what you guys do and some of the things that you guys work towards?
Sure. So at the Coaches Association, we are the professional labor organization for all active head and assistant coaches in the NBA. That's our 30 head coaches, and each season, give or take, we have about 170 to 180 assistant coaches. And our active membership, these men and women pay dues, but we also keep in touch with a group of about 2 to 250 inactive coaches. Now, these could be any individuals who unfortunately were recently fired or let go, all the way to some former coaches that we have in their 80s and 90s who are still very active with coaching clinics or looking to break back in. And so that's our membership, and a lot of the legal items that we work on, we collectively bargain with the league over retirement benefits. And then we also help our coaches in reviewing their employment agreements, certainly when they get hired and fired, but also helping out with any disciplinary issues, any other fines or suspensions that they might get over the course of a season. And then on the business side, we try and liaise with the NBA on anything and everything off of the court, right? So we try and take care of some group marketing opportunities. We try and facilitate speaking engagements and media opportunities, and really we just look to take care of a lot of the items off of the court that are non-X's and O's that our coaches and their agents, we have some tremendous agents in our business, and even their own attorneys or financial advisors, items that they might not be thinking of. So health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, and just making sure they're either on the right track, or if they need information or resources or just want an entity to ask questions to, they have that in the Coaches Association.
Yeah, and so that's a lot of people in one association, right? You mentioned 170 to 180 assistant coaches. There's the head coaches. There's the previous members. What would you say is the key to staying in touch with all those people and maintaining a good relationship with those people?
Mm-hmm. I think it always comes down to whatever business you're in, but especially if you're in a service industry or client-facing industry, it's all about relationships. And so sometimes, even remembering, very small details about someone, or I've given every coach my cell phone number. And so, one thing I can't control is how quickly you can respond. And it's to the point of, even if you're busy with something, a quick email or a text back that you're on it, or you'll give them a call back. I think that goes a really long way, especially with managing, this type of group who are extremely busy on their own, right? They're traveling all the time. They're almost never in the same city for more than 24 or 48 hours. And so it's kind of just always being on call, but then being able to get them an answer if they need it right away. And if, we don't have it at the moment, letting them know that, we're on top of it.
So I assume no 2 days are really the same for you, but as best as you can you paint a picture of what your day-to-day kind of looks like?
Absolutely. So, just going through kind of a daily routine. So my wife and I, we live out in Connecticut, and so get up in the morning and have about an hour train ride into Manhattan, into New York City, where the Coaches Association's office is. And one thing I try and do every morning is meditate. So for about 10 minutes through an app, a wonderful app, it's called Headspace.
Mm-hmm.
Try and take, just 10 minutes in the morning. If I have the time before the train, I mean, that's ideal. But oftentimes it ends up being on the train, where, before you start your day, before you're diving into anything, you just kind of take a moment to pause and clear your mind. And I started doing this about 3-4 years ago, when I first transitioned into the role of executive director, and was given this advice from a colleague, and just really found it to be tremendously helpful. It kind of lowered stress and allowed me to think creatively, and just really fortunate that I can do that. And so for anyone who does have a commute in the morning, highly recommend it. But so I'll take 10 minutes to meditate on the train, and the rest of the train ride, I usually spend setting up my day. I'm the type of person that is really detail oriented and a big planner. And so sometimes I'll write out daily to-do lists, or I'll try and knock out some emails, and just really setting up my day. And I get into the office usually around an hour to 90 minutes before any of the other employees get there. And I really find that time in the morning to be my most productive.
Mm-hmm.
It's right when the coffee is setting in, the phones aren't ringing. No one else is in the office. And I try and get through the most important task of the day in that time period. So then I can free myself up for later in the day, which inevitably is unpredictable as coaches or other work colleagues are calling, or items are coming up.
So I want to stop you right there. How do you determine what the one thing is? because I've heard this. I've read multiple books. There's a fantastic book called The One Thing, sitting on my bookshelf over here. I have trouble determining what that lead domino is sometimes. Do you have a framework for how you decide on what that is?
Yeah, and so even to take one step back, I I feel like there are two types of people, especially when it comes to um, technology today and emails. And I'm the type of person that if my inbox is too cluttered, it inherently stresses me out. And so by the end of every day, I try and get my inbox down to zero,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll flag the important items throughout the day. I'll even send myself personal emails that I can then flag, and so every day I'll try and get my flagged emails also down to zero, which helps because the next day I know some of the major items that I haven't tackled because they're still sitting in my inbox. But I think when it comes to the substance of what these are, it kind of just tracks our annual calendar. And so I'll know, between March or April, excuse me, and May and June, this is the time when a lot of our head and assistant coaches are changing jobs or getting let go. And so there's a lot of employment agreements to read through.
Mm-hmm.
Last season, reviewed probably between 60 and 70 employment agreements. And so I'll know in that moment, a coach will, or his or her agent, will need a response fairly quickly. So that always sits at the top. And then throughout the year, if it's managing a budget or working with our tax consultant to prepare year-end documents. So I think having a really good idea as to
Mm-hmm.
the business and what needs to get done at what time in the year really helps to keep that focus on that one major item.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're probably very, very good at scheduling and anticipating what's coming, and that's a huge part of your success thus far, is just being able to plan ahead and know. I mean, obviously you can't plan for everything, right? But the more cognizant you are of what's coming and what's important, the easier it is to tackle. Good lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Good lesson for everybody listening.
Yeah, and I think every person is different, but knowing either your own strengths or your own weaknesses, or even your own, I don't know if it's your circadian rhythm or just how your body functions throughout the day. I know I'm much more alert in the morning to get that work done, and so I'll try and get those items done in the morning and look to plan a lot of my phone calls or meetings in the afternoon, which inherently, again, I love that people aspect. And so that inherently gives me an extra jolt of energy or just allows me to kind of do those things in the afternoon. And so I try and mirror that schedule almost daily.
I love it. So 30 NBA teams, you know, however many coaches, how many coaches would you say on average each team has?
I would say, so let's say given we have 180 assistant coaches, 170, give or take the year, that's somewhere between 5 and 6 per staff.
So how do you find the time to be able to meet with everybody?
So one beautiful thing about working in New York and our offices, we're about 5 blocks south of the NBA's headquarters. We're a block east of the Players Union. So we're all in this very close triangle of proximity, which makes meetings, that much easier. But what we try and do is whenever the teams come through New York, we'll meet with the different coaching staffs. And we usually meet, sometimes it's with the head coach, but often it's just with the assistant coaches on the staff when they come through New York. We have an opportunity to meet with all 30 of our head coaches in Chicago once a year in September, and we have our larger membership meeting in the summer and at Las Vegas Summer League. And so it's really having this opportunity to meet with all 30 staffs. And as you can imagine, every year there's new coaches, and again, just putting a face to a name.
Sure.
They'll all receive the emails, they'll all get calls, but it's having that FaceTime, even if it's, an hour a year with one coaching staff. It just elevates that relationship that much more.
And if you're free to talk about it, what are some of the things that you guys discuss?
Yeah, so the two main things that we talk about in our meetings are some of the benefits that our coaches are entitled to, and just making sure they're aware of what they're entitled to. So one is helping them understand their retirement benefits that they're entitled to, either through the team or through the NBA. And then also talking about some of the financial benefits that they're entitled to through the Coaches Association. And what we do is the revenue that comes in from some of our partnerships or marketing agreements, outside of paying for expenses, we slice up and give right back to our members. And so making sure that they're aware of these benefits and being able to answer some questions about the retirement plan or point them in the right direction to who they need to speak with, that takes up the majority of these meetings.
I can imagine. Are coaching contracts pretty standard?
They're not, and this is also something that's fairly interesting that we talk about in every meeting. So unlike players and the players union, who collectively bargain over contracts, and the players have what's known as a uniform player contract, our coaches are very different. And so even on the same staff, we could find no two coaching agreements to be the same. And so it's also trying to educate our coaches as to some of the trends that are out there, what language to look for, possibly some language to stay away from. But it's also one of the benefits and a beautiful aspect of it, because coaches can be really creative when they're negotiating with management. And one thing that may be a big benefit to one coach may not be as important to another. And so it's just a really big education process. And this is something Coach Carlisle, Coach Carlisle is the president of our Coaches Association and the president of our executive committee, and has been this is his 15th year. And so we always have a saying that we want to have the most educated group of coaches in sports. And a big part of that is awareness and just continuing education onto some of the legal aspects, but more importantly, some of their financial benefits and insurances that they can take care of off the court.
I love it. Huge part of the job. And I keep hearing you use the word educating, which we'll get into in a little bit here. I want to shift gears a little bit. We talked a little bit about mentors earlier. Talk a little bit about some of the mentors that have had an impact on your life, if you could, please.
Sure. So for me, really three main mentors stick out right off the bat. First and foremost, and spoke about him a little bit, but Michael Goldberg. Michael was the first executive director of the Coaches Association, started in 1980 and worked up until he unfortunately passed in 2017. So for 37 years, Michael was our executive director and did so much for the Coaches Association in terms of improving retirement benefits, increasing salaries, helping grow the game internationally and getting coaches exposure through some of these international clinics. But I got to know Michael, largely through that first interaction at the Sports Law Symposium. And, Michael he was my boss, he was a mentor, he was a colleague and a friend, but in many ways, he was like a second father to me. He treated me, not just as an employee, but really as an extended member of his family. And so, Michael took a chance on me when I was just starting out, and I owe just so much to him and to his family. And so when he passed, it was extremely bittersweet. Michael, when he hired me, for years, he kind of worked as a solo practitioner, always had some interns and and had some other employees at his agency. He ran an agency where the Coaches Association were a client. But for the most part, worked on his own. And so I think I happened to be at the right place at the right time, but also prepared, because if this was 10 years earlier, I don't know if Michael would have been in the position to hire. And if it was 10 years later, someone might have been in this role. But so again, I just owe Michael a tremendous tremendous amount of gratitude. He taught me everything I know. He took me to so many meetings, and looking back on it, I laugh, but kind of put me in a lot of situations, which allowed me to step out of my comfort zone. And in a sense, I think he was, just testing to see how I would do in those situations. But it's one of the biggest things that I tell students or any individual at some of these speaking events is, first and foremost, if you want to break into the industry, you have to be passionate. But outside of landing that first job, I think it's even more important to find a really good mentor, to find a really good supervisor, superior, who will take the time to teach you the right way to do things, help you correct some mistakes. And I think that's tremendously more valuable than just landing, that first dream job or getting that first step in the door.
You have any advice as far as how to find mentors?
I would say it's a lot like any other aspect of what you're doing. It's finding what you like and what you don't like. And so oftentimes, the first mentor or the first, professional that you meet in the industry may not be your mentor. And it's finding what clicks for you, finding what clicks for them, finding some shared interests. And I think one great way to do that is, I mentioned these symposiums, but any leadership opportunities you can get, any event planning you can do while as a student, or even for outside organizations, a bar association, a trade association. If you're in that position to reach out to individuals to get them to speak at events or participate in events, you're inherently having that one-on-one time. And I think helping plan some of these events is a great way to get in front of them, but also to figure out if they would be willing to take you on as a mentee or kind of guide you along the way.
Absolutely. And those who have heard other episodes of this podcast are going to roll their eyes, because I talk about this on just about every episode. But, getting involved, right, with, you mentioned the Sports Lawyers Association, or for me, I was the president of the USC Sports Business Association, right? That I can connect the dots back to being involved in that organization to where I am today. And I think a lot of people who have broken into sports can probably do the same. And like you said, Dave, being able to reach out to people, right, is such a huge thing, right? And when you are part of the leadership of an organization and can get that one-on-one time because you're able to invite them to speak at an event, that's a huge leg up.
Mm-hmm. And if you're at a place, or even if you graduated and you don't have an opportunity to do these things, there's always an opportunity to volunteer or go to some events. Some of the best advice, I've heard or given, especially in the New York area. I mean, you can volunteer at a Roadrunners event, or any of a number of local charity events or anything. And it's, again, for some people who aren't as outgoing, it may be tough in the beginning, but really challenging yourself to get out of that comfort zone and getting those face-to-face interactions, it's really helpful. And especially if you can work with someone in the industry, even if you're a leader of a student organization and helping them with a PowerPoint, or picking them up somewhere, anything you can do to make their lives a little bit easier, they'll remember that. And this is also a piece of advice I try and give to students is, if you can make yourself, not only indispensable, but also once you do land that job or once you have those interactions, I always encourage people to find out from their superiors and their supervisors what some of their favorite parts of their job are, but also some of the tasks that they don't enjoy as much, and learning from them and then being able to, maybe gain that expertise to take some of those items off of their plate. That goes just a really long way, because at the end of the day, if you can make your boss or your board of directors or whomever is slightly above you, if you can make their jobs that much easier, it's going to make you indispensable to the organization.
No question. And just to put a bow on the conversation regarding the associations, I mean, I've gone as far as to recommend to people where if they go to a school that doesn't have a sports business or sports law association, to go out and create it, right? That's how much I believe in the power of those associations. And secondly, as far as my involvement with the USC Sports Business Association, I definitely had to step out of my comfort zone in order to be that guy. Like, I was not a born leader. I was not somebody who wanted to organize other people or who really thrived in speaking in front of large groups. But I knew that if I could step out of my comfort zone and do the things that it took to excel in that role, that I would take a step forward in becoming the person that I needed to be in order to become who I wanted to be.
Absolutely. And just to follow through that, especially for any of the students that are listening, another really great piece of advice that I heard when I was in school, and especially for any lawyers that are out there, it's the ability to read and write, and one step further to get published. I heard that early in my career, and was fortunate to publish a few articles and that dealt with labor issues in basketball. And every subsequent article got even more niche to the topic of NBA coaches, because I knew I wanted to impress Michael and gain some expertise in this exact area. But now being on the other side and having hired a few attorneys and some interns over the years, I always gravitate towards an article that a student or an attorney has written, because you can get a sense very quickly how well they can read and write. And often as you're combing through so many resumes, it's always a little more interesting to see what people's passions are that they took this time to research and write, and hopefully get published in a journal. And there are so many ways to get published nowadays, even through different blogs or trade associations. And so that's just another piece of advice that I always try and give to students.
It's great advice. I want to get back to mentors. I want to get back to Michael. What are some of the key things that you learned from Michael?
I think for Michael, it was his ability to connect with people, how genuine he was, how transparent he was, and just how he would go about his day. I learned a lot about taking care of the most important items in the morning from Michael. I learned about how he interacts with some of the coaches or people at the league office, and even how he stands out. Michael, for almost his entire career, exclusively wore bow ties. Mm-hmm. And Michael found this out early in his career that in New York City or even in the sports industry, how can you stand out? And Michael, the brilliant marketer that he was, took it to wear bow ties. And so Michael was always the guy that wore bow ties, and people would instantly recognize him. And one of my, again, it's bittersweet, but one of my favorite memories is, when Michael unfortunately did pass, we organized between the league office and the coaches association, and one of our partners at the time, for 4 days for every coach around the league to wear bow ties to their games. And it was just a really fitting and tremendous way to honor Michael. But to learned a ton from him, just how he carried himself and handled himself in meetings, and also the true value of relationships, and how getting to know someone on the other side of the bargaining table and learning what it's important to them, learning what things they would need before diving into what's important to his clients. That's something I also learned from Michael.
Sure. And you now wear the bow tie yourself, correct?
I do for most of the major events as a way to honor Michael, but also, I mean, it's a really great way to stand out and have people remember who you are, and so in his honor at every major meeting, I'll be wearing the bow tie.
I mean, which also says a lot, not to go too deep into this, but, considering your family history with ties, the fact that, you're wearing the bow tie means a ton. So,
yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned that there are two other mentors that have really, shaped your thinking in your professional career. Who are they?
Yeah. So the second is, and spoken about him on a little bit earlier, Coach Rick Carlisle. Coach Carlisle, as many of you know, head coach of the Dallas Mavericks, and Rick has also been the president of our executive committee for about 15 years now. And it was in that moment when Michael, had gotten sick and he had passed, that my relationship with Rick really took another level. Rick was extremely generous with his time. He's extremely intelligent, but just like Michael, very genuine, and just loved having Rick be not only a teacher, but also just a mentor as to really the interest of a lot of our other coaches, teaching a lot of the history about the Coaches Association. And also, Rick is a tremendous barometer. He has a tremendous barometer for what the NBA and the league office is thinking, or what might help them in a lot of our interactions. And so, I'm amazed. Even during the season, I'll speak with Rick sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And so just the fact that he's always there if there's a question, but also that he's always there when we have important items, important meetings. Rick is just tremendous in that regard. And when Michael passed, it was, again, bittersweet for me, but Rick really stood up for myself and spoke to our executive committee and all of our other coaches to put me forward to and allowed me to excel and step into Michael's old role to carry on some of his great legacy and traditions, and accomplish a lot that we knew Michael would accomplish, but that he wasn't able to, due to his passing. And so just Rick, a tremendous amount just for having the confidence in me at a young age to move forward and become the executive director of the Coaches Association.
What would you say have been some of the key things that you've learned from Coach Carlisle?
I think being direct, being transparent, and this idea of educating and bringing awareness. There are times when I forget, but because I speak to Rick so often, we will have 200 other coaches around the league that may not be getting the same information. And so really taking the time to set these meetings up, or send out coach-wide internal communications, or having phone calls with key stakeholders at each team, just to keep them up to date about what we're working on or what some of the major issues are, I think is something that Rick has instilled in me, and I know that's how he'll kind of treat his own staff as well.
Be direct and transparent. I think that's great policy. What about the third mentor? I know you had 3 that you mentioned that have been key to your life thus far?
Sure. So the third is, his name is Charlie Rosenzweig. Charlie is an executive at the league office, and Charlie was extremely close with Michael, and also, since Michael's passing, has really done a tremendous job of, Charlie's now our direct contact for anything that we liaise with the league, any business relations, any charitable, nonprofit, or social responsibility initiatives, and just having that almost daily communication with Charlie, but also educating me on again the importance of relationships, but how to navigate some of the different departments at the league office. That's something that is also tremendously valuable, and I know if there's ever a question that he has or I have, it's a direct line of communication, and just someone who I owe a lot to as well.
So Dave, we're starting to run out of time here, and I want to be respectful of your time. So just a few final questions, if you've got have the time.
Of course, absolutely.
What's one piece of advice you've received in your career that you'd want to pass along to the next wave of talent?
I think one piece of advice, and touched upon it a little bit, but to really get out of your comfort zone, to really, get out from behind a computer screen or a cell phone, and really get those face-to-face interactions. I think for when it comes to breaking into the industry or having a long career in the industry, people will be amazed at how far relationships can take them. And it's not just who you know, but also who knows you, and who can speak highly of you. And you never know in that moment who an individual is that you'll meet that could become a lifelong connection. And so it's always being prepared when you are at any of these events, but first and foremost to get out and go to those events. I think that's tremendously important, and also the ability to read and write, especially for attorneys. I cannot stress that enough. To try and hone that skill early and often, so you're prepared for that next wave of your career.
You mentioned meditating, anticipating, what your schedule will be like for the day. Do you have any other habits, rituals, or routines that you think the audience might benefit from hearing about?
Yeah, one in particular, and it's kind of my afternoon ritual. So in the morning, I'll meditate for 10 minutes. Right after I eat lunch, right before I grab that second cup of coffee, weather notwithstanding, I'll walk outside of New York City, the same 10 block radius, and I do it every day. And it's just a way for me to clear my head a little bit, similar to the meditation. Given the items that we work on at the Coaches Association, and sometimes how different things fly in, it gives me the time to not only clear my head, but also think about some of these more challenging aspects. So I'll take those 10 blocks, and some days it'll take me 15 minutes. Some days I'll walk a little slower and just think through everything. And again, just sticking to a routine, but having that in the afternoon also tremendously helpful.
Now, are you listening to music? Do you have your phone with you? I mean, what exactly does it look like? Or are you just, alone with your thoughts?
Yeah, alone with my thoughts. The phone is in my pocket, as it always is, just in case I'm going to get a call, but no music, no headphones, kind of just, I know where I'm going. It's the same 10 blocks, but, oftentimes I'll, just kind of be in my own world and in my own zone, which, in a crowded New York City streets is often tough, but I, kind of find a way just to block everything out and try and focus on clearing my head.
But I'd bet while walking the streets of New York City, you're probably in the minority as far as, not being on the phone, not having headphones in, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Everyone that I see, or almost everyone that I see has headphones, or, looking down at a screen. And, I say the same 10 blocks, but there have been a few times where I've just been so deep in my thought that, before I realize it, I'm close to the water, which is the complete end of one side of Manhattan, and I'll have to pick up and kind of remember where I am and get back to the office.
I love that. And I just got done reading a book, Digital Minimalism. I won't go too deep into it, but it's by Cal Newport. I'll put it in the show notes. But, one of the things that the author talks about is just the benefits of walking and how some of the greatest people in history were walkers, and they would take the time to walk to sort through their thoughts, right? Steve Jobs was one of them. Lincoln was one of them. I can't come up with any more off the top. David Fogel, obviously, but it is
an extremely distant third in that group.
Yeah. Hey, it's a good list to be on, but it's a highly underrated thing to do, right? Is to just, take some time, get the blood flowing, let your thoughts kind of simmer, and, highly recommend to everybody, if nothing else, just read about the benefits of walking with no headphones and just being alone with your thoughts. If there's anything you take from what David's talked about, it should be that. Absolutely. Well, Dave, you've been incredibly generous with your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. And I've got multiple pages worth of notes of other questions I wanted to touch upon. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point.
I would like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Final question. Do you have any requests or asks for our audience?
No, I'm always open. I tell all of the coaches this, but all of the students too. I taught for 2 years at Pace Law School. If there is any questions that anybody has, reach out, shoot me an email. My contact information is on our website at nbacoaches.com, and would just love to hear from anyone. And if there's anything I could do to help pay it forward, or you name it, just let me know. Happy to do so. It's how I got to this position. Michael Goldberg and Coach Carlisle put a tremendous amount of faith in me and helped me get to this point. And my grandfather had people help him along the way. So any way I could pay it forward, would absolutely love to.
You're a good man, Dave. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sergio.
And there you have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with the one and only David Fogel. You can find the show notes for everything we discussed at sportsbusinessclassroom.com/David-Fogel. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, and anyone you think might be able to get something out of it. And if you can, please take a few minutes to review the show on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have any follow-up questions for David or myself, feel free to leave a comment on the site or send us your questions on social media by tagging us at Sports Business Classroom or at Fogel NBCA on Twitter. Big thank you to our sponsors, Sports Business Classroom Online and Hall Pass Media, and thanks again for listening. We will see you here next week on the Sports Business Classroom audio experience.